everyone. I'm Melissa Donovan, editor of Industrial Print Magazine. Welcome to today's talk on direct-to-object printing. Just-in-time decoration is growing as more brand owners recognize the popularity of customized products as well as capsule collections. Digital printing is well equipped to meet the demand. For pre-manufactured objects, direct-to-object digital printers are ideal. But there is choice when it comes to these printers. There are solutions ranging from turnkey to bespoke, and bespoke direct-to-object printing solutions are designed from the ground up to work within an existing production space. Some vendors also offer base printer models, which can be retrofit or customized to meet the needs of a manufacturer, whether it's their space restraints or some other type of criteria that they might have. So creating that middle option between true bespoke and turnkey is sort of ideal. Many factors go into constructing or choosing the right solution. This includes, but is not limited to, inkset and adhesion, print resolution, print heads, drive electronics and motion control, curing and drying hardware, and software. We plan on addressing all of these topics in detail today, but first I'd like to introduce our guests and invite each to share a bit about their company and what sets them apart from the competition. First, we're going to start with Direct Color Systems, who's represented by Adam Torville, who's the Director of Sales North America at the company. And welcome, Adam. Thanks for joining us today.
Thank you, Melissa. Really appreciate being here. So Direct Color Systems was founded in 1995. We are a small, mid, and large format inkjet printer manufacturer based out of Rocky Hill, Connecticut. And one of the things a lot of people don't know about us is that we also do custom ink engineering. So that means custom printers, like you said, bespoke printers, or even just modifications to our current print systems. And what that does is it allows us to print to a lot of different materials and substrates. So if you think about anything in your house, your kitchen, your garage, chances are we've probably attempted to print to it over the years. So that's one of the reasons why, we are where we're at, is because we're able to adapt and be agile to those changing markets for people.
Great. Thanks, Adam, for joining us today. We'll invite you back in a second once we introduce everyone else. Thanks. All right. And next up, we are going to invite Jim Lambert into the stream. Hi, Jim. Welcome.
Hi, Melissa. How are you?
Good. How are you? Jim's the president and GM at Inks International Ink Co. Jim, just share a bit about the company with us, if you could.
So we are an ink company, Inks International, but we do have a lot of technical hardware prowess. We have acquired a number of companies in the digital arena over the past 10 years or so. And one of the companies happened to be a hardware company in Huntsville, Alabama, that does drive electronics, ink delivery systems, customized software. It has a lot of intellectual property that's centered around printing on or direct object printing. And so we've been doing that for many, many years. This acquisition for that particular entity happened about 13 years ago. So we've been focused on this market for quite some time and really enjoying watching how it's been growing over the last 10 years or so.
All right. Thanks, Jim, for joining us today. We'll invite you back in a second. And we are going to bring in James Bullington. He's the CTO at Elsing Corporation. Hi, James. Thanks for joining us today. Oop, James' mic is muted still.
Elsing Corporation is a custom design house for product development. And in that, we've developed a series of products surrounding off-the-shelf print engines for doing direct object printing, most notably contour printing, where we're printing on media that changes in diameter, that's axisymmetric with various contours. And a lot of that information is available on our website. But that's rather unique. It's much different than just printing on a cone or a cylinder. But again, that's just one area of focus on our digital direct object. In that same arena, we've been doing industrial print equipment and in design portions of it for the last 18 years.
Great. Thank you, James. We'll invite you back in a second, and we are going to bring Bob Keller. He's the president of Marabou North America in to tell us a bit about his company. Hi, Bob.
Hi, Melissa. Thanks for the invitation. It's good to be here. Marabou North America, we're a subsidiary of our German parent company. The parent's been in operation now for nearly 170 years, privately held, and we've been doing nothing but ink since day one. Inks being all the way back to the pastel paints that were used during the Renaissance period. We have a lot of product that are in the hobby stores like arts and craft stores such as Hobby Lobby and the like. But the main focus for today's discussion will be obviously digital printing. But we come from a long background of screen printing and pad printing, and it was a natural progression to get into digital in the early 90s. We have fantastic relationships with tons and tons of printers that have been with us for decades, and it's just a natural progression for them to look to Marabou to provide some custom digital inkjet solutions. So happy to be here. You'll see a lot of reaching across the aisle from division to division within Marabou. For products that don't quite fit the bill, we can oftentimes go and find maybe a screen printing product that'll suit the intense requirements of the digital inkjet side of things. So again, I'm happy to be here, and thank you.
All right. Thanks, Bob. And last but certainly not least, we're going to invite in Jonathan Wilson. He is the Director of Sales at Meteor Inkjet Limited. And hi, Jonathan. Thanks for joining us today.
Thank you for having me. So for those that don't know, Meteor Inkjet is one of the biggest electronics providers for piezo-based printheads. We do drive electronics and software, but we're also part of a much bigger group, the Global Graphics Group, that provides software in terms of RIPs from Zytron, a hybrid workflow for pre-press, and Global Graphics do specialist inkjet screening and ripping technologies. We provide inkjet technology across a broad spectrum of markets, from ceramics, direct to object, 3D, and everything else in between.
All right. Thank you very much, Jonathan. We're going to add everyone into the conversation now. Hello. So thank you again all for joining us today. Let's start the conversation. So we're going to talk, as I said, about the demand for direct-to-object printing and more specifically custom bespoke solutions. But so let's get us started. Bob, it seems like there are just so many market segments that these printers really touch. And because of this, it's almost necessary to have a more unique custom system depending on the buyer, the manufacturer who's looking to use it. Would you agree? Oop, and you are muted, sir. Oh, dear.
That was my fault.
There you go.
Yeah, my fault
Totally
completely. Without a doubt, there's no question in that. Just a standard off-the-shelf solution is never going to fit every requirement for every different market segment. And we've already heard from some of the others already that there are so many different inks in the market, so many different print heads, so many different applications, and even more importantly, so many performance requirements for the different market segments that you can't just build a single system. We're involved in some market segments where you can get away with, by and large, for example, a standard flatbed. Promotional products, anything that's flat, pens, those kinds of things. But when you start talking about inkjet as a manufacturing process, you quickly get away from that. And as a result, all of the folks that are moderators today have their hands in different segments of all the pieces that really need to come together to provide a full customized solution for an end user.
All right. Thanks, Bob. Now, really what's making this all possible are the slew of technology advancements across the board. And we're talking from the ink to the hardware to the software. And Jonathan, could you talk a little bit more about this and kind of as piggybacking on what I was continuing to say, but there's the fluid delivery systems and motion control mechanisms, the drive electronics. I mean, everything is affecting, these advancements.
Absolutely. And let's make two assumptions first so we know what we're talking about. The first is we have a director object where maybe the print head is moving around the object, or where the substrate is moving underneath the print heads or around the print heads. So the technology that has come along has brought in previously disparate systems, from motion control, robotics, fluid delivery systems that can deliver fluid at all sorts of different angles, throw distances from print heads, resolutions of print heads, All of those have evolved. We now have print heads that can stand off from an object massive amounts of different distance, but can deliver high volumes of fluid precisely where needed. All of this has come together with software that can deliver the right pixels, mapping the shape, firing the waveforms. All of these pieces now come together to give us the flexibility to print on virtually any substrate, any shape.
Okay. And Adam, in your experience, what type of changes are customers looking to make to these printers so that the system really fits their space and need? And actually, I should backpedal. I mean, we're talking about bespoke from the ground up, but then as I mentioned in the intro, there is that discussion of some type of a base printer where people are, tinkering with it. So I should rephrase my question in that sense, Adam. What have you noticed?
Yeah, and that's a great question, because there is the bespoke side, which is, custom made machine from the ground up, whether it's single pass or even a custom made flatbed made for a specific purpose. We'll talk about both, but on the bespoke single pass side, what we're seeing is a lot of robotics. Over the last 10 years, there's been a big shift to robotics where people want to be able to use, FANUC robots, 6-axis robots, spider robots to actually load and unload the printer. And what that requires is a lot of communication electronically to the motion control, to the ink delivery system, so that they know where the pieces and the parts are and they're printing to the items accurately. Now, on the pre-made flatbed side, where people are modifying the printers, a semi-bespoke machine per se, what we're seeing is a lot of people are modifying the machines to increase print height, to increase print speed. They may even be adding some sort of semi-automation, which could be, conveyor belts feeding up to the machine with a robot, placing the items onto the flatbed.
Okay. And James, you've referred to this as almost that have it your way approach, which I think we see in more than just, our industry, but in so many others across the board. Can you kind of expand on that a little bit?
We're constantly seeing people request, their particular type of media, their particular ink. They're already printing with some version of ink that they want to use elsewhere. How can they stretch that intellectual property and experience base across multiple items? So you see that effort to go in and do the adhesion testing, the scratch resistance, the wearability of the inks on the media to be able to satisfy those overall requirements. And even in the case of contour following and printing on direct object media that is of different shapes, the constant request is, can you print on my piece of media? And it's developing printers that actually satisfy those requirements.
Right. And now consumer demand is really dictating these smaller runs and more customized, personalized products, which is why we're seeing really that increased need for digital decoration. So Jim, could you talk a little bit about some of the benefits of using digital for us?
Sure. You look at the conventional printing methods today, and they're great for high volume, long runs, but they don't get across what the brand owners are wanting. So I think the most important thing as we look at this is, the benefits are to the brand owner. These bespoke systems that we're talking about allow the brand owners to really get a late stage differentiation in their product on the shelf. So instead of having a label on the bottle, they have something direct printed on the bottle that might be more dynamic and a little more impactful on the shelf than the other types of products that you see there. So as we see this, this whole market, it's one of those that we really want to focus on what the brand owner is asking for, and this is what we're seeing, them being more demanding as we go on this direct object, ride.
Right. And I just want to throw into, everyone's had a chance to speak after that. And going forward, if anyone wants to jump in after a speaker has their commentary, by all means, raise your hand or, give me a little actual wave and please, feel free to contribute. So that being said, Jonathan, COVID-19 brought to light a lot of the frailty of the supply chains, Jonathan. And I think you would have to agree digital really shines here in that sense for being as beneficial as it was during that time. And actually, it's still kind of going on.
For sure. I think one thing that the pandemic showed us, that the supply chains were exposed. Major brands couldn't deliver even simple things like paracetamol in Europe. The centralized production in Asia has caused significant issues, and even today we're still catching up. Brands have realized that they now need to reshore certain production facilities, and the digital print allows that just in time to do that. You can have localized production, versioned, everything you need, and digital print allows that to make sure that those gaps in the supply can be maintained should we see hopefully not, but another pandemic.
Thank you. I mean, and it's bringing a lot of stuff. I mean, we're based in the U.S. Obviously, Jonathan is not from his accent, but it's bringing a lot of stuff made in the U.S., that manufacturing back into the U.S. And I think, again, we don't want to be in another pandemic. I don't want to live through another one, but it definitely is nice to know that we can make something and manufacture in the U.S. Going forward, and the supply chains, we can handle that over here. Anyway, so we've touched on demand and benefits. So let's talk about how someone can justify the investment of a direct-to-object digital printer, particularly something more custom, not so much turnkey. So James, if we're understanding digital technology, it's really key to justify the investment by kind of having that whole picture, really understanding digital, correct?
It is key to understanding the entire picture. You've got to look at all the stakeholders that are involved. If it's a brand owner, they've got to understand what's it going to do to their additional market saleability. If you're looking at digital ink costs, in particular in UV, the cost of the ink itself is more than some of the other traditional methods. But the flexibility of being able to do it in a just-in-time manner to cut down on overall inventory requires that the manufacturing team be involved in the overall decision-making process to look at how do each of these steps save the company money? How does it bring extra value to the sales force that's going out and penetrating new markets? And what's the final picture going to look like? If it's just a direct ink for ink comparison, it's very difficult to justify replacing an existing piece of equipment.
Great, and that's so true. Bob, did you want to jump in?
Sure. I think having been in so many of my different customer locations and watching them in many cases struggle when it comes to making the leap from current technologies to digital, I think one of the most overlooked factor when it comes to implementation of digital is the ease of use. And what I mean by that specifically is the folks that are using the equipment, even though it might cost millions of dollars, these are generally speaking folks that are hourly employees. They don't get the high level of training as the engineers who built the systems. And as such, they have to be pretty bulletproof. They have to be put this item here and push this button there, and hopefully there's nothing they have to do beyond that. And when the first system started hitting the market, I would say that's where most of the failures occurred. An engineer could operate it just fine, but when it came to your standard folk behind the assembly line, that's where the problems arose. And manufacturers getting a whole lot better now. They're spending time with the customers. They're understanding their workflows, all of the requirements. And now when systems are being delivered, they work, and they work really well.
And I think it goes back to the difficulty and the fact that every system is so individualized.
That's right.
That you just can't go in with a pre-existing game plan because you just don't know until you get there. So no, that makes complete sense. So Jim, let's talk a little bit about speed. Sometimes I don't know if people understand that if you're putting a solution into an existing production line, no matter what you're manufacturing, that printer needs to fit in speed-wise, or maybe even not speed, but it needs to be slower than you would expect it to be. Can you speak a little to that?
I sure can. So yeah, the one thing that you have to be very, very careful of, especially if you integrate a system into an existing line, is the speeds either have to match, or you've got to have some parallel processes that somehow or another take some of this process offline and then kind of funnel it back into, to the existing production line. That's typically something that people don't think of. As they look at doing this, they look at just trying to decorate or print this object without thinking about the entire process. So one of the most important things in building this bespoke system, or if it fits into a line like that, is to really look at the entire problem from beginning to end. And that is, not only do you have to decorate the object, but you have to have material handling systems that do everything that would be done in a normal production environment. You have to be able to match speeds of whatever's coming off of that line, either through an injection molding device that might be feeding the printing system, or some sort of pick and place system that picks these glass bottles up and puts them on the line. And that's a whole art in and of itself. You really need to understand, all about motion control and how that works through the print zone. So one of the most important parts, obviously there's a lot of important parts, somebody mentioned it earlier on the conference, but one of the most important parts is to really try to look at rate and speed, and then how that fits within the line that you're going to put the machine on, or the printer on.
All right, thank you. And Bob, you mentioned ease of use, but was there anything else that you wanted to add about, sort of like characteristics or factors that one should consider when they're educating themselves about building a line like this? You're muted.
Sorry about that. I would normally tend to say that because I'm an ink manufacturer, that ink is the most important factor. It's not always the case. I think one of the colleagues here mentioned that James did, when it comes down to just one ink versus another ink, if the performance requirements are not high, there's really no justification to even consider it. But there are some applications for which ink is the most important factor. If you're printing on food packaging, for example, that ink cannot have any migration whatsoever through the packaging into the edible material on the other side of it. So as a result, you could build the best system in the world for printing, but if you don't have the ink that meets the performance requirements, you're out of luck. So you have to look at each and every individual application on an individualized basis and start with the requirements and then build from there.
Great, thank you. Oh, Jim, go ahead.
Yeah, and Bob, that's a perfect point. I was going to add one thing to that, and that is the hardest part in building these bespoke systems is to actually simulate all of this, because you don't have the system there to simulate it. So as you're thinking about this system and what the ink requirements are and what the speed requirements are, one of the other things to take into consideration is, how do you simulate printing on this object without having the finished system there to do that with? And that's why, finding those correct integrators and things like that can help you with that is also a very important part of the process. I didn't mean to interrupt your flow there, but I wanted to comment on what Bob had said, and I agree with him completely.
Nope, that's completely fine. That's what we want. We have some organic conversation here. I know it's a little hard when we're all in 6 different places, but we'll make it work. So Adam, when you think about it, is it kind of worth taking a step back and examining the issues in a production line or, in your facility, and then kind of address each challenge or issue and see how digital can kind of affect or influence each one? I don't want to say fix, because digital isn't, we want to say it's a fix-all for everything, but so is that what you think maybe is the best way to go about it?
Yeah, I mean, the second most important thing, I too was an ink guy at one point, and I agree with Bob and Jim as well, is the ink needs to be the first thing to be tested. You got to find an ink that works, and then find an integrator that can test for you to make sure that, hey, we can do a proof of concept. But one thing, we like to do is we like to go on site and see the actual production line and see the facility, because just talking to someone about it doesn't fill in all the gaps. It doesn't fill in all the questions. So going on site, you can see what the current issues and problems are. And then with everyone on this call today, their experience in inkjet, they can look at it and say, okay, inkjet can help with this, or maybe even create a bigger problem. We talked about material handling and whether or not it has to be an offline product, whether you're taking it from the manufacturing line offline, or if you're going to try to integrate it into a line, kind of like how tile printing has. All that needs to be taken into consideration. But first thing you need to do is make sure the ink works. Second thing is proof of concept. Third thing would be make sure that what we're doing actually is going to help them and not cause more issues.
Oop. All right. No, that's so true. Exactly. You don't want to open a whole can of worms and go in the other direction. James, what else did you want to add to that? Other things that need to be considered besides ink and when you're doing kind of like a build out of it?
Well, in each of the cases, it's important to understand what the customer really needs from a resolution standpoint. Resolution determines the choice of print heads oftentimes and determines the level of accuracy that the equipment has to be designed to. So someone that's doing corrugated packaging may be able to get away with a lower resolution than someone that's doing, point of sale or a cosmetic item that's going to be at the point of sale with a very high level of touch and feel. So there are differences there that if you say one thing fits everything, then the highest resolution is going to rule out a lot of applications. Both from a speed and from a cost standpoint. So it's important to understand really what they're trying to achieve. Somebody that's trying to do a really high mix, low volume production arrangement, it's understanding how quick their changeovers are and how to design their tooling so they can effectively make those changeovers and incur the least amount of downtime.
Awesome. Wow. Sorry, guys, I keep double clicking on that and we go from 6 to 1 to 6 to 1. Jonathan, what about other things like drive electronics and motion control? Can you share a bit about that?
Sure. There's been lots of mention about ink, and whenever we're engaging a new project, we always speak to our customers to make sure they understand which ink they're going to use, then choose the head and make sure that head's qualified for that ink. There begins the challenge with the electronics because there are such a wide variety of heads on the market, high resolution, low resolution, high firing frequencies. So it's having a spectrum of electronics that can meet all of that, and then the software to drive all of that. And then of course you need the waveforms. So you've got the ink, you've got the electronics, you need an optimized waveform so you can get the best out of the ink. So the drive electronics have to be tunable to make sure you can manage that. And the same for motion. When you're talking motion today, you're not talking just X and Y. You could be talking many different axes moving of a print head around, synchronizing all of that and delivering the data down to the print head at the right time is a challenge. With new processing capabilities, it's much less of a challenge than it used to be.
Okay, thank you. And yeah, James, go ahead.
I'd like to add into that, the motion control side of it is extremely important with higher resolutions. In our case, we're doing printers and selling printers that have 18 axes of coordinated motion at 1 millisecond refresh rates. And in some cases, as high as 46 axes. When you're looking at 12 heads, you're manipulating for lay down on 12 colors at the same time. So it does become a very, very challenging problem the higher the resolution is.
Now, Jim, an often overlooked area during the build process is actually the motion and movement of the product that's going to be printed to. Can you explain why this is?
Yeah, and again, it's kind of a combination of what everybody else has said. A lot of people just don't understand, what they're up against. They don't understand the process. They're used to conventional label application machines and things like that. This is really a whole new world for them. And as James mentioned, imagine printing on something like a bottle that has some sort of contour shape, and you have to make sure that the print head stays relatively planar or in line with that profile of that surface. So it's really just that they don't understand the process. They're used to the conventional ways of doing things. And, once they see and they understand how this is done, they have a whole new appreciation. And again, I hate to keep going back to the brand owner side of things, but I am going to, kind of bring it back one there for just a second. And that is that, what really is driving this, if you look at a conventional label and what it can actually do to a bottle, for example, I'll use one, not to give an advertisement for anything, but, the label is really constrained to most of the planar surface of this object or this package. And digital printing allows you to do so much more than this. With the appropriate print head and the appropriate handling of the head, you can literally print from almost the top of this bottle to the bottom. And so the brand owners are the ones that are driving this, but they really don't understand it. And so the whole key here is to make sure that they understand, what this new process is, and it's not just a label like they're used to doing.
Thanks, Jim. I mean, and that's so true. The brand owners are driving it. And so it's kind of coming from the top up in a way. So there's that disconnect between the people who are actually going to be on the floor in the facility using the machinery, and then the people who are saying this is a great idea. And you kind of need to be in the middle, all of you guys, to connect the two and explain to them what can be done and what can't be done, et cetera, et cetera. So that being said, when we're creating these solutions, whether it's ground up or modifying, it's a big investment. And so I kind of want to talk about how important that return on investment is, how we can gauge that. And I'm going to ask all of you your thoughts. So I'm kind of going to go around the table, if you will. So let's start with Adam. And again, I want everyone to feel like they can kind of jump in on this once everyone speaks, so we can kind of have a conversation about it. But go ahead, Adam.
Yeah, so return on investment, we usually look at the product and the print speed, what we're going at, the frequency, ink cost, and we kind of come up with an overall generalized number first thing, because everything in business runs on money, right? If it makes sense financially, then they'll move forward with it. If it's something that doesn't make sense financially, then there's no reason for them to do that. And then there's the other ROI that usually gets disregarded is, the ROI of your people, training, educating your people to run the system and make sure that they're fluent in inkjet as well. I mean, Bob talked about making it easy for them to print, but we also like to make sure that someone on site understands the machinery a little more in depth, which takes training, time, and it's not just a money issue.
Right. Okay. Bob, go ahead.
When I first got into this portion of the industry, you found by and large there were folks that were buying digital technology because it's cool. And many times when new technology comes out, people buy it because it's cool. Well, those days are long gone. The folks that are now buying this kind of equipment, they're very, very educated in every penny that goes out of their facility. So I'll give you an example. I went to visit one of my customers up in New York, and not long before then, they had just passed the $15 an hour minimum wage requirement, and it was affecting them. And instead of seeing this building full of people upon people upon people, I looked over and saw half a dozen robots, literally robots that were picking things out of boxes and putting them on a conveyor belt. And when I asked him, the production manager, I said, "What is this for?" He told me, and he told me exactly what it cost him for the equipment versus a person and the healthcare and all those other things. Mm-hmm. So it's not uncommon when we take a proposed system into a customer, the first thing that he does or she does is pull out a stopwatch, and we'll click and time every single piece and know exactly how much margin they can make just based on that alone. So yes, ROI is huge. It can't be just cool anymore. And unless you're bashing through barriers like coming up with new personalization methods that didn't previously exist, unless you're making a leapfrog jump in what the brand owner is able to deliver, you better have a very good ROI. Otherwise, you're not going to get anywhere.
Jonathan, thanks, Bob.
Mm-hmm. I agree with what everybody else has said, but I also think there's another new agenda that's coming, and that's the greener agenda. People are far more aware now of the products they're buying and where they're sourcing them. So they expect the production facilities to map out the resources, the energy that's being used. So more efficient processes, which is something digital printing does phenomenally well, means that all of this can be showcased. So when people are doing the ROI, it's not necessarily just about the return on how much they've spent. It's how much energy they've not consumed in using traditional processes. It's the amount of clean water that's been saved. All of these make a massive difference and will drive uptake from the brands going forward, I believe.
All right, thank you. And James?
From our standpoint, we've seen people looking at their head count. How many processes are we going to combine into one solution set? How many jobs actually get cut out, much like Bob indicated, the robots replacing it. They're looking for those same types of gains within a given printer to be able to facilitate the lowest head count they can achieve. And the other side of it is processes that are traditionally very, very artistic in nature. whether you considered something that traditionally is hand painted, now you can digitally print it in a way that looks and feels as if it's almost hand printed or hand painted, excuse me. And in the case of water slide decals for the decoration of particular types of media, there you've got people that have been trained in the application of that process, but every piece that's fabricated is somewhat different and prone to error because of the human interaction. Whereas as it's replaced with digital, each one is replicated and as identical.
All right, thanks, James. And then Jim?
Yeah, I'm the last one, so I don't have much to add from whatever everybody else already has. Other than I would say, there's also things that when you're considering this new system that you need to take into account, and that is inventory handling, storage, production interruptions, things like that are kind of hidden costs that a lot of people don't evaluate. And I think it might have been Bob's point, everyone today that's looking at this migration to digital printing is so much more sophisticated than they were 10 years ago. 10 years ago, it was easy because it was the cool factor. And if you just went and saw something being printed and you held it up and said, look what I just did, everybody was going, we got to do this. And now it's just not the case. They're looking at every single aspect of the process, from things that you normally wouldn't think of as a cost, like, production interruptions in conventional printers versus digital printers, storage, handling, what happens to a bottle that's produced off of an injection molded line, and then it has to be labeled somewhere else versus maybe you print it near line or in line with the molder. So it's really things that really weren't looked at years ago. And I mean, literally 3 and 4 years ago, and now there's really sophisticated teams in place that say, really, what is the cost of this to me and our company?
Great, thank you. Okay, so we're going to take some questions. I had one come in while we were speaking, and it was just wondering, based on what you guys are seeing in the market, any new exciting verticals that may be capitalizing on digital decoration. And I mean, obviously, it's been a tough year, so I bet you guys have the inside track. So what can you tell us, anyone?
I wish I was able personally to talk about some of the cool things that are going on out there in the market, but unfortunately 99% of them are tied up in non-disclosures. So when you find a vertical that a customer is willing to spend the money to create this, they don't want their competition to know anything about it. So it's unfortunate, but it's one of the restrictions that we operate under. And there are some really cool things coming. I know that's kind of a tease, but that's the best I can do.
Nope, that's completely fair. Jonathan?
Yeah, I have to second with Bob. There's some amazing stuff going on. I only wish we were allowed to talk about it because it would take your breath away. But I'm sure in time this will become very obvious to people.
I just like to be creepy and go through the stores and try and determine whether or not something was digitally printed or not, and drive everyone I know crazy. So I'm sure you all do the same. Yeah,
I do the same thing. But, one thing about inkjet too, and, we do have some really interesting things coming out, is when you think about inkjet, it is the only form of printing that does not make contact with the substrate that you're printing to. Everything else makes contact, which is why that makes it possible for us to use robotics, why it makes it possible for us to put it into, industrial applications.
Yeah.
And the moral of the story is that we can't talk about it. However, there really isn't a whole lot that you can't print digitally, in some form or fashion. So if you look at everything out there, and Melissa, to your point, I do the same thing. And my wife gets mad at me going through the stores. I pick it up, I look at it, I scratch it, and I smell it to see, to see if there's any latent odor from ink or whatever. And what you can pretty much safely say, and I think everybody here on the panel today, is we've been asked to print some bizarre things, and there's not a whole lot of limitation to what you can't print digitally.
Yeah, I would just like to say, if you look at ceramics, which is probably one of the older digital markets, there's still a lot of consumers that have no idea that the floor tiles or the wall tiles that they're fitting are digitally printed. They have no idea. You take people in and show them and you tell them it's printed, they're like, no, yes. And it's been for decades.
I know that process is fascinating. Bob?
I was going to say, to further Jim's point just a little bit about almost nothing that can't be digitally printed, that in a backwards way actually kind of defines our strategic direction as an organization. And what I mean by that is if we have the choice of spending R&D dollars in a market segment that has the potential to be consumed by digital into the future, you're going to find us spending very little money there. But where there are applications, electronics, touch screen, some of the much more industrial applications for which screen is probably going to remain in the driver's seat for a very long time, or at least for the remainder of my lifetime, that's where we're spending a tremendous amount of dollars to perpetuate the screen and pad printing lines that we do have.
All right. And this isn't a question that came in, but as we were talking, I was just thinking of it and just curious. I mean, the folks that you've worked with to build these systems, what's kind of the lead time like sometimes? Are you guys like taking a idea and how long does it take to come to fruition? I mean, are you fast tracking these to kind of, say it's a brand, they're trying to beat their competitor before they can do it? If anyone wanted to hop in and kind of give their 2 cents on it.
Yeah, I mean, it really depends on whether or not they already have an ink that works in our fashion as a builder and integrator. And the reason why that's so important is because sometimes ink development can take, 6, 8, 9 months, a year, 2 years. So if there's already an ink developed, the equipment side's a little easier for us. Now, if the product's really difficult, we're talking multi-axis stuff, then it definitely will add time to it. But you're talking, lead times of 6 months to a year, depending upon the build.
Okay.
Melissa, one of the defensive postures, or I don't know if you call it defensive, maybe overly offensive. I've seen brand owners come in and look at technologies, and in order to keep competition from getting their hands on it, they'll buy the entire thing. They'll buy the patents, they'll buy the equipment, they'll buy the integration, and that's how they own it. Rather than race, they just spend some dollars and acquire it.
The only reason I ask is because Instagram, the ads that come up, but a stereo system manufacturer started printing, I'm assuming digitally, images that you can upload and put onto the stereo. I don't know if anyone's seen this. And I was just thinking in my head, how long did that take to figure out? I mean, it's plastic, so obviously it's not completely difficult, but that's what made me think of that question anyways. Mm-hmm.
I'm just happy to hear that Adam recognizes that the ink development is just as difficult as the hardware development. that was my big takeaway, Bob. I think you probably like that as well. People,
for sure,
they're both very, very hard, and it's hard to imagine how much time fluids can take to develop, to stick on some unusual surface that you haven't tried to do before. So when you look at the components here, you've got the ink and the hardware, and they're both very challenging in almost every aspect of the problem or the situation. But ink can be just as long, if not longer, in some cases, than the hardware development part of the project.
And that's why I think Adam suggested that's got to be step one: is finding an ink that meets the requirements. Then you worry about the rest.
All right. Well, I want to thank you all again. Oh, Adam, did you want to say anything or?
No, I'm just, ink first, people.
Okay. Ink first. But not really, because we have other people here, so I can't say that. Everybody. All right. Well, thank you all for participating today. I very much appreciate it. And I just want everyone to know that a recording of the webinar is going to be available on industrialprintmagazine.com. And we'll also have a full feature article on the subject that's going to be in our June issue. And all of these fine folks are also participating in the article as well. And that is available in a few weeks. So thank you again, everyone, and have a fantastic day.